Hello and welcome to another A Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Here's another Frontline update for the 6th of December 2022. I'm not 100% over my illness, so do bear with me. I've got a cup of tea though, so it's enough to make any half-ill person as strong as an ox or something. Anyway, what has happened overnight? Well, it's more about what happened yesterday. As you know, there were a whole host of missile strikes across across Ukraine, but actually most of them got shot down. So the best figures we have are that here I think sums it up the best. Andrew Perpetua says Russia has about 50 of these bombers because I'll go on to talk about how the bombers were hit yesterday. And with their range, they fired more than 70 missiles into Ukraine from various platforms, including 60 KH-101, KH-505, and Caliber missiles, and 10 KH-22, KH-59, and KH-31P missiles, as well as many S-300 missiles. Ukraine reportedly shot down more than 60, and Russia claims 17 found their target. Russia has the resources, he says, to fire between 4 and 8 more of these strikes, depending on whose estimates you use. So they don't have that much more in the locker. And what happened? Well, first of all, the Ukrainians were happy with shooting down the amount they did. It's hard to know really because you just look at these numbers and think, well, 60 out of 77 maybe. Is that as good statistics as they have had before? But then it depends what missiles are getting through. It might be the S-300s that aren't as powerful are actually more difficult to take down, and so therefore if they get through it's not as bad, and it depends how you kind of slice and dice these figures. But good, I mean, some footage is coming out. Here's interesting footage because it's an autocannon of the Gepard shooting down a cruise missile. So these things really are, becoming sort of heroes.
Есть контакт! Есть, бля, родимая, готовь, суку!
So that's pretty good footage there. And then there are all sorts of different things taking out these cruise missiles. So this is a Buck, which is a surface-to-air missile system, one of the old sort of Russian ones. And that's finding its target as well. So there's a whole variety of things. I'm sure the Nazams and these other systems were working over time, and they all obviously, when you're taking out 60 of these missiles, you're going to have a wide range of kit that's doing that defense there. But it's the Ukrainians seem to be happy enough. And what's interesting is we haven't had the knockout of the infrastructure that we had in previous attacks. So I think this attack was certainly less problematic for the Ukrainians. Didn't seem to be as many missiles. Last time there was almost 100 or perhaps over 100 missiles. And it's certainly, if you include drones this time, I've not heard of drones being used. And the missiles were in this sort of 70 region. Again, what does that tell you? As another interesting nugget here is it was noticeable that most, if not all, of Russia's missiles were launched at sea. Even the bombers from Saratov flew towards the Caspian before unleashing their deadly load. A military expert says it's because so many old missiles fail and will fall in the water. So when you take into account that the two where are they? Let's come out a little bit. Here, that's a bit better. Two airstrips that were used were Ryazan and over in Saratov. If they were to take off and release their missiles from here and they failed, they would fall on Russian territory. So I don't know about the Ryazan, but they're saying that the Saratov bombers flew over to the Black Sea to then release their bombs or their missiles into Ukraine. So it's really interesting that they're doing that, and it just goes to again, if that is true, what's the most plausible explanation? Well, I can't think of anything being more plausible than, unless the air defense is really weak around here and missiles are easy to get through, then the only other option is that it's for safety, because if their missiles do fail, they'll fall into the water and not on Russians. But there you go. There were these claims, not claims. We've got, the Russians have admitted this. Two bases were hit in Russia, which were, as I say, in the Saratov area and Ryazan there, and that caused a bunch of damage. Not It's not crazy damage. So some bombers. Here's what Andrew Perpetua says: Ukraine shot drones into two Russian air bases and damaged several strategic bombers, which made Russia big sad. Confirmed Russian losses are 3 men, 1 truck, and 1 damaged bomber. Unconfirmed reports indicate possibly 2 to 4 destroyed bombers and 3 to 6 more damage. Okay, but the reality is those strikes wouldn't have caused too much damage. But that's really not the point. The point is a massive statement, and it's a statement that do you know what, this is what we can do, and you need to watch out. And in fact, the Russian media at the moment is up in arms today about how this has been able to happen. There's not any confirmation at all from the Ukrainians that they did it, but obviously they did. But there's also no confirmation as to what pieces of kit were able to get through and to do the damage in these two Russian bases. There's some theories that it's kamikaze drone of some variety, or one-way drone, and other theories that it's an old Soviet, reconstituted Soviet drone that quite an old-fashioned one that has been repurposed. I don't know. Maybe the truth will out. The UK Defence Ministry has said the explosions at the Russian air bases may be some of the most strategically significant failures of force protection. And this is because, you know, they were able to get some kind of munition all the way from Ukraine to just outside Moscow, right? And to all the way over here in Saratov without them being shot down. Now, whether they were shot down over the base by the base themselves and then came crashing down and didn't hit exactly their intended targets, I'm a little bit unsure. Some people say they were shot down at the base, but they may alternatively just hit the target too. So what this then says to the Russians is, hey, this is what we can do and this is what we will do. Now, the Russians have been kicking off saying, oh, this is, and some people have been saying this is escalatory. It's like, well, that's a little bit unfair considering, you've been sending stuff over the Russians, the Ukrainians all this time for them to say that, hey, this is escalatory and you shouldn't be doing it. As Maria Drutska says, honestly, I still can't get over how Russia is basically allowed to commit genocide on our land, run torture camps, bomb our hospitals, target our energy so we freeze and starve. But it's escalation if we want to stop their bombers and missile launchers that are literally killing us. Absolutely, 100%. And there is an awful irony that yesterday was the anniversary of the signing of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. So a lot of pro-Russians talk about, oh, Minsk was broken and the Minsk agreements. But actually, 1994 Budapest Memorandum said that Russia promised Ukraine never to, quote, threaten or use military or economic coercion in return for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. So Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons, and Russia has literally invaded Ukraine. Just so there you go. But what has happened then today is that Ukraine are continuing attacks. So in Russia tonight, so this was actually last night, there was a new attack by an unknown drone on the Kherson military airfield in Kursk. As a result of the attack, an oil reservoir near the airport caught fire, and there's loads of footage of really dramatic sort of fire and whatnot. And it's not only in Kursk. Something started to burn in Bryansk, 80 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. 2 drones attacked an enterprise. Despite the fact that the tanks were empty, a considerable fire broke out, they say. Well, you know what that means, waiting for visuals. And indeed, I think that's the same place that was attacked 6 days ago. So that's interesting. And just to let you know where Kursk and Bryansk are. So here's Ukraine, and this is Kursk, the oblast, and this is Bryansk Oblast. Okay, so just over the border, really, and they're sending drones in to there. It appears, as opposed to missiles, but it could be missiles. I'm not 100% sure. And hitting targets. So really, really interesting that that Ukraine are really ramping up their attacks into Russian territory. And talking about this sort of area, so here you've got the Sumy sort of region there. Russia fires at Sumy 84 times yesterday. Sumy Oblast Governor Zhivitsky said that Russian forces targeted Shalenyi, Krasnopilia, Bilopilia, Muropilia, and Esman communities. It's 84 times. Wow. And then there have been a few other hits. According to General Staff, Ukraine, this is Ukraine hitting back on the Russians. Sorry, no, sorry, that's my next one. This is Russians hitting Ukraine. They launched 17 airstrikes and 38 MLRS and multiple rocket launch attacks against Ukraine over the last 24 hours. So not only did you have the barrage of missiles, cruise missiles and whatnot, but also MLRS. Now, each of those MLRS attacks might be, a dozen rockets or more, maybe 20 rockets. It depends what launch system they're using, but that's not going to be that's not 38 rockets, that's going to be 38 barrages and 17 airstrikes. So planes launching other stuff, I guess, outside of the cruise missiles. So it was a really active day yesterday um, uh, for the Russians. Let's have a look at the figures that sorry, I was just seeing whether I missed anything else out. No. Okay, so let's have a look at the figures that the Ukrainians gave for the Russian losses yesterday. 510 personnel, so that's pretty much as it has been for the last few days. 5 tanks, 5 APCs, 61 cruise missiles, +1 compared to yesterday's first data. So actually, there's an extra one there. 5 UAVs. Those would be sort of not the drones, not things like the Shahid. So it doesn't seem that they're using them at the moment. Some claim it's too cold, but I'd say the most obvious reason would be that they just have run out of them. 1 artillery system, 8 vehicles and fuel tanks and whatnot. So fairly, I guess, a typical day across those stats as according to the last week. Okay, let's get on to the front line. Okay, let's go to the northeast corner, the Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line. Always start there. So the first thing to note up here is right up and just northeast of Kupiansk. First I've heard of anything really around here for some time is that the Russians have been shelling Tavozhanka. Now, if they're shelling Tavozhanka, it means that the Ukrainians have some kind of presence there. So I know very little other than that, but that is something I want to watch out for over the next 24 hours. That's interesting if the Ukrainians are making some advances to the east and north of Kupiansk, because basically this area here has not changed for, I don't know, a month, something like that. Other than that, there are claims that the Ukrainians are moving towards Orlyansk. I've got Orlyansk as under Ukrainian control, but it could well be just grey around there. There is geolocated evidence that a small settlement just here, Zatizhne, is under Ukrainian control. Some people have this still as a grey area. So Andrew Perpetua, I think, does. He talks about how well, somewhere he talks about where is it? Can't find it. Oh well, too many maps. But he talks about how they're advancing towards Orlyansk and that. Yeah, here it is. Ukraine may have secured several towns east of Kupiansk, all considered grey areas previously. However, I will update my map once I have confirmation. So I actually have all this area just here in blue for Ukrainian. He has that as a grey area. There's this little settlement there has been geolocated under control by the Ukrainians. So I'm happy to confirm that, but minor details. That's what's going on there. And then we come down, let's go back to my map. We come down further down south towards Novoselivska. There is geolocated footage of Ukrainians in Novoselivska, but apparently this has been flattened. Really, there's just, typical sort of target of artillery. These towns and villages just are uninhabitable going forward. But yeah, other than that, not much to report from there. There's heavy fighting around Kupiansk, but Novoselivska itself is still contested. Still repelling, so the Ukrainians repel attacks towards Stanomachivka, whilst also trying to do their own attacks. And this is what I say quite often is that in one point the Ukrainians are attacking, and a couple of kilometers north or south they are repelling Russian attacks, and it's sort of very, there's no consistency to a front line. It seems that the different armies are working in small units and companies, doing their own sort of thing, and might be sort of breaking through in one area whilst in the next area, depending partly on the geography and the landmarks around, might be under a lot of trouble, under a lot of pressure. So then we come down towards Ploshchenka and Chervonopivka. A lot of talk about this. So according to NOR reports, the Ukrainians, and this is according to Serhiy Haidai, actually, head of the Luhansk military administration, the Ukrainians are advancing deep into the Luhansk region. P-66 between Svatove and Kreminna is under full fire control. Russians are digging in, building defense lines, and near Svatove, the Russians have withdrawn personnel and equipment. And then, yep, that's what I've told you. Then we are looking at sorry, too many maps. Oh yeah, here we go. Received. So the Ukrainians are pushing in the direction of Chervonopivka and Krasnoyarchensky. I'll come on to that second point in a second. So I'm going to leave it as it is at the moment, but there is good reason to think that the Ukrainians have made some advances here. And as I talked to you in my kind of video on strategy yesterday, the question is, what do they do with this? So once they're broken through here, is it about encircling Kreminna and those towns? Is it about breaking through towards Starobilsk, or is it sort of circling up north to try and help out with along the front line towards Svatove and try and encircle Svatove? All three. But this is quite an important area. The issue is the Krasna River. There are only certain number of bridges across the Krasna River. It's not a huge river, but still, when you want to move a lot of equipment, possibly quite quickly, you are going to need some decent, a decent way across that, and that might dictate, where they attack and how they attack. But I believe the bridge in Krasnoyarchensky has been blown up. So that might dictate, what you see going forwards in this area. This is low land here because this is a river valley, if you like. This is high ground along here and along the highway. So the Ukrainians have the advantage now by being along here for attacking and going forward, and then the ground will start to rise as you come towards the east, and then there are second lines of defenses backwards from there. So yeah, interesting to see what will happen in that area going forward. As I said yesterday, it looks like there's a small settlement around Dubrova, which has, here it is, Kuzimina. There is, the claim is from no reports that is the village that is now under Ukrainian control. So I will just adjust my map to reflect that. Just really quick, I'll have a look in more detail later. But there's a bit of movement there. Question is, what are the Ukrainians doing in this area? Because I think it would be pretty much suicidal to try and attack any of these settlements full on. Maybe they could find their way up through here and across the highway and across the railway that goes along there and cut that off. But other than that, I don't think they want to do a full assault in that general direction. Now, interestingly, I've heard no information about this Bilohorivka, the Luhansk Bilohorivka here, or any kind of activity around here, and in Spirnia as well. Not heard anything there, and that's, there's been a lot of activity over there the last few days, but yeah, just not heard anything out of here. This other Bilohorivka, which is now into the Donetsk Oblast, I have heard that possibly Ukrainians have gained some ground there, that the Russians have lost a little bit of ground. So here, Russia likely lost ground to Bilohorivka over the last 4 days or so. But as Andrew Perpetua also goes on to say, the situation in Bakhmut is as bad as ever. Berestova, Yakovlivka, Soledar, and Bakhmutska have no changes to my knowledge. I have heard the Yakovlivka, so let's just show you where that is. Oops, sorry, wrong map. So Yakovlivka here is under quite a bit of pressure, and there's possibly some Russian gains in that area. But then, one person will tell you one thing, the next person will tell you something else. Soledar is also really hotly contested. So there's the idea. In fact, I think it's Defmon saying that the north is now looking. No, I think it was Defmon somewhere else saying that while the Russians have successfully made some gains in the south, and had much greater intensity down here in Kupiansk and trying Klishchivka, they are also stepping up the intensity to the north as well. So that's interesting. So I talked to you about this little gas station here last week, and said that there were four different pieces of footage, nighttime footage, thermal imagery of Russians, of this being taken out by artillery and Russian troops being liquidated there. I didn't show you the footage because it would have been inappropriate. Well, I've since heard, but only from one other source, that the Russians have actually lost this. Which would be quite important because this is on high ground. This is a useful place for the Russians to have. But then again, them having that, they are just apparently open to be, bombarded by artillery. But that would be useful if the Ukrainians had regained control of that, especially since this is a road junction across roads. And if you want to give yourself a buffer zone around here and be able to use these roads eventually, this is the first place you're going to need to get back. So there you go. And as we come further down south, Opitny, there's a lot of fighting still in Opitny. Klishchivka, the Russians apparently have been repelled from there, and they might have lost a bit of ground around Klishchivka as they were gaining in the fields just in front of that. But this is a bit of a, everywhere it seems in front of this road here seems to be a bit of a killing fields, because you're quite open to be sighted by drones and just hit by artillery. So it's difficult for the Russians here, and that's why it's such a meat grinder of a position. Because back here, the Ukrainians will have a lot of artillery. They've got a load of reinforcements that have come into Bakhmut now. They've still got these roads allowing supplies into Bakhmut. So although these northern ones might be under some kind of fire control from the Russians, or at least they were when they were in this kind of area of the gas station, but I don't know whether that's still the case. So it's this is going to Klishchivka, which is key, is going to be tough for the Russians to take, and they are struggling there a little bit at the moment. And in fact, Defmon says that there might be some evidence that Kupiansk is still contested. So it might be that the Ukrainians are still in and around the edges of Kupiansk. I don't know about the Georgian unit yesterday that was surrounded, whether that was kind of where they were. And then they sort of fought themselves out, but they did lose a few, and their commander got injured. So that's what's going on around Bakhmut. Much of the same. Let's move on further down south. Oh, actually, just before I do, just this little piece from Andrew Perpetua here saying that actually Ukrainians have attempted counterattacks in Opitny, Kupiansk, Avdivka, which is this settlement just there that's not marked on the map, yes, but they unfortunately failed in all of those attempts. So Ukrainians are trying to regain lost territory, that is for sure. So no real news out of Mayorsk, which is there. Oops, annoying. Let's try and get my map pointing north again. As we come down to Avdivka, which is holding out against the attacks from the Russians, who are trying to encircle them, coming out of Donetsk. Fighting is still ongoing around Opitny. I showed you a little bit of video footage to say that although the Russians control Opitny, it is getting constantly harassed from these sort of fields and tree lines and what to the north. There was claim that the Ukrainians actually attacked into Vodyane from the west. So they are putting a lot of pressure on Vodyane. There's still, it's still contested. Vodyane it's I don't know quite how far the Russians are there. In fact, I receded their lines a little bit recently. Uh, and the same in Pervomaisky. So it claims that they've lost a little bit of ground there, and in Novelsky just down here. So actually, the Russians are under a bit of pressure from some Ukrainian counterattacks in that whole area. As Andrew Perpetua said around Avdivka, the line appears to have stabilized in recent days. Ukraine pushed Russia back a bit in Novelsky and especially Pervomaisky. So there you go. That's good news for the Ukrainians. As we come further down here, no news out of Krasnohorivka, but there was, that was pretty hot the other day. Marinka is still sort of 50-50 or thereabouts. Russia seem to be, moving forwards, but I've got no details about where the lines would be. It's just that's going to be one hellhole of a place to be right now, Marinka. And then we come down to Vuhledar, which is under quite a bit of pressure. Let's have a look at some of the claims around here, going down to Pavlivka. So, according to NOR reports, Russia lost momentum in Pavlivka and is now focusing on shelling Vuhledar and Vuhledar. Russian forces inside Pavlivka have retreated to the southern outskirts due to Ukrainian pinpoint strikes inflicting heavy damage. Marinka is still 50-50. So what this means is that, I don't know that it's correct of me really to have Ukraine having control over half of Pavlivka. I don't think Ukraine are in Pavlivka particularly. However, they are hemming the Russians back to the outskirts with pinpoint artillery attacks, and that is keeping them to the south. So they only really control the south of Pavlivka, while at the same time they are hammering Vuhledar with artillery and all sorts. So they are putting a lot of pressure on Vuhledar, which is what they should have done anyway. I don't know why they ever tried to put ground troops into Pavlivka and take it by, using troops and mechanized equipment when they could just do what they've done pretty much everywhere else, which is flatten places with artillery and airstrikes. So it seems to be that they've worked out that seems to be a good idea to do there as well, a little bit late. And they're trying to hit Vuhledar in the same way. Other than that, not a lot of news really from Zaporizhzhia, sort of the odd skirmish here and there. The same with Kherson. Kherson is the scene of quite a lot of heavy shelling from both sides, really, but certainly the civilians are feeling it on the right bank of the Dnipro River, as our friend Noel Reports says here, which is just up here. More AFU recon was reported on the left bank near Oleshki, so that's where I told you about the flag that was raised on the left bank of the river, which is just opposite Kherson. What you have is a whole bunch of sort of little islands in this kind of delta and sort of port sort of things that there must be sort of recon units operating on. That it's not far really, a little boat trip, and I'd imagine they'll be incrementally sort of taking control of this land. I mean, there'll be no one there in terms of the Russians. Very likely that Ukraine controls parts of the islands there. Kherson, Nikopol, Berdyansk, Chornobivka were subject to shelling today, so they are heavily shelling around there. But no, other than that, no real news. No news about Kimber Peninsula and any kind of other activity going on there. And I haven't actually heard too much about sort of HIMARS hits, because we hear so often about sort of HIMARS hits around Kherson into sort of almost near Crimea and around the Zaporizhzhia area. But I guess the news of the missile attacks yesterday might have eclipsed other information coming out from the area. So I'll let you know when I know. But that's a kind of picture of where we're at, which is fairly similar. However, the Ukrainians are making some gains towards across the P66 highway there. That's going to be key. And just to remind you what I said yesterday, or let you know if you didn't see my video on moral philosophy and how that can affect strategy. I was talking about how this whole area here is the Ukrainians fixing. My opinion would be this speculation is the Ukrainians fixing the Russian forces here in some kind of big meat grinder. So the Ukrainians just take up a defensive position. They don't really. They're not really looking for any kind of offense around here. I don't think that will just use up too many of their resources. That fixes a whole load of Russian capability and capacity there, which then allows the Ukrainians to do whatever else they want to do. And the question is, what else is it that they want to do? Um, you know, this is where you start strategizing, and this is why I did that video last night talking about, well, it depends what their goal is. If their goal is logistics and not losing troops, then they are going to be doing very different things than if their goal is taking the most amount of territory that they possibly can, and which would be very different from killing as many Russian troops as they possibly can. I don't think that's their goal. I think their goal is going to be logistics, and that will be the case for the next few weeks. And even when you see troops break through lines in an offensive, I don't think it's going to be to liberate territory. I don't think it's going to be to kill Russian troops. I think their primary goal is going to be hitting logistics hubs. But I could well be wrong there. So whatever move they do, either up here, down there, it's all about fixing the Russians here, and then hitting key targets, softening them up first with HIMARS and rockets attacks, and then any move with troops will be strategically targeting logistics hubs. Anyway, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. And you can support the channel in loads of ways. They're all down in the description box below. Buy me a coffee, or in my case, a tea. Thank you very much. PayPal. All my books you can grab. Just thank you so much for any support you do throw my way. Toodle pips, and I'll see you in the extra video later.